Blood trickled down Elijah Blackwood's temple as he stared at the three small coffins. The store manager who had humiliated his daughters now begged for mercy. Too late. The DNA results confirmed what his heart already knew. These girls were his, and someone would pay. Before we dive into this heartbreaking story of racial injustice and unexpected family connections, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed discrimination and wanted to step in. Subscribe now to follow Elijah's journey from a bystander to a father, fighting against impossible odds for the daughters he never knew he had. The morning had started like any other for Elijah Blackwood, a 53-year-old self-made tech billionaire who preferred anonymity to the spotlight that often followed men of his wealth and stature. Despite owning Blackwood Technologies, a company valued at over $20 billion, Elijah dressed in unassuming attire, dark jeans, a simple navy button-up and loafers that had seen better days. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, but nothing about his appearance screamed money or power, which was exactly how he preferred it. The autumn air carried a slight chill as Elijah entered Luminance, an ultra-exclusive boutique nestled in the heart of Manhattan's Upper East Side. The store was known for its curated collection of designer pieces that most people would need to save several months' salary to afford. The moment he stepped through the glass doors, Elijah felt the familiar sensation of being sized up and dismissed. The predominantly white staff barely glanced in his direction, assuming from his casual appearance that he couldn't possibly afford anything in their precious store. The boutique's interior was meticulously designed to intimidate: blinding white walls, minimalist displays and lighting, so precise it made every item appear to be floating in space. The atmosphere wasn't just exclusive, it was actively unwelcoming to anyone who didn't fit their narrow vision of an ideal customer. Elijah was browsing a display of watches, considering a gift for his longtime assistant Jordan's upcoming 10-year work anniversary, when the bell above the door chimed. He glanced up to see a black woman in her late 30s, entering with three identical little girls, each around 4 years old. The woman, later identified as Patricia Thompson, wore a simple but professional outfit, a kindergarten teacher's practical elegance. The three little girls, Zora, Nia, and Maya, were dressed in matching yellow dresses with white cardigans, their hair styled in neat puffs adorned with yellow ribbons. They held hands in a chain, following Patricia with the practiced obedience of well-behaved children accustomed to public outings. Elijah noticed something strange in himself, an immediate draw toward the children that he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was their quiet dignity, unusual in one so young, or perhaps something deeper that he wouldn't understand until much later. The store manager, Victoria Harrington, a white woman in her early 40s with an immaculate blonde bob and a pantsuit that probably cost more than what Patricia made in a month, immediately fixated on the new arrivals. Her steel blue eyes narrowed, her lips pursed into a thin line of disapproval. Victoria didn't approach them immediately, but Elijah recognized the look. It was the same expression he'd seen countless times in his life, the look that said, "You don't belong here." Patricia guided the girls toward a small selection of children's clothing, murmuring gentle instructions to stay close. The girls waited patiently, standing in a perfect line, their hands clasped in front of them, as Patricia examined a dress that had caught her eye. "It's for a special occasion," Elijah overheard her explaining to the girls. "Your first piano recital deserves something extra special, doesn't it?" The girls nodded in synchronized excitement, their eyes wide but their bodies still careful not to touch anything in the pristine space. The peaceful moment shattered when one of the triplets, Nia, though Elijah wouldn't learn her name until later, took a small step backward and lightly brushed against a display table. Nothing fell, nothing moved, but the contact was enough for Victoria to swoop down like a hawk spotting prey. "Excuse me," Victoria's voice cut through the quiet atmosphere of the store. "What do you think you're doing?" The sudden sharpness made all three girls jump, their identical faces registering shock and confusion. Patricia immediately looked up from the dress she'd been examining. "I'm so sorry, did something happen?" she asked, her tone respectful but confused. Victoria's eyes flashed with a disproportionate anger. "Your child just tampered with a $5,000 display. Are you aware of how expensive the merchandise is in this establishment?" Patricia gently set down the dress she'd been holding and moved to stand protectively near the girls. "I apologize if she bumped something, but nothing appears to be damaged," she said calmly, maintaining her composure despite Victoria's hostile tone. Victoria's nostrils flared as she looked down at the triplets with undisguised disdain. "Nothing appears to be damaged. How would you know? These items are delicate and valuable. I've been watching you since you came in, and I'm not convinced you're serious customers." The implication was clear, and Elijah felt his jaw tighten as he watched the scene unfold from across the store. Patricia straightened her spine. "We are paying customers. I'm purchasing a dress for my foster daughter's piano recital." Victoria laughed, a sharp sound devoid of humor. "Foster daughters. Well, that explains the lack of proper behavior. Children need to be taught how to act in establishments like this." She snapped her fingers twice, summoning security. "Harold, please keep an eye on this. Family. I believe they may be attempting to distract staff for theft purposes." A bulky security guard nodded and moved closer. Patricia's expression shifted from confusion to outrage. "Theft that's completely unwarranted. We've done nothing wrong, and I'd appreciate it if you would speak to us with respect, especially in front of the children." Elijah had seen enough confrontations like this to recognize the dangerous trajectory. He found himself moving closer, still observing, but ready to intervene. Victoria was now inspecting her immaculate white designer heel, where a small smudge of what appeared to be mud was visible on the pointed toe. Her face contorted with rage as she turned back to the girls. "Which one of you did this?" she demanded, thrusting her foot forward. "Which one of you dirty little girls ruined my $800 shoes?" Victoria moved with predatory precision, separating the triplets from Patricia with a simple gesture to Harold, the security guard, who immediately stepped between the foster mother and the children. "Ma'am, please stay where you are," Harold instructed. Patricia, his voice monotone as if he'd performed this exact task many times before keeping undesirables from causing problems in the pristine shopping environment. Victoria circled the three identical girls who huddled closer together, their wide brown eyes, tracking her movement with growing terror. Zora, the most outspoken of the three, tried to reach for Nia and Maya's hands, but Victoria stepped between them. "No, no," Victoria said with false sweetness that didn't match her cold eyes. "I want to speak with each of you individually." Patricia struggled against Harold's blockade, her voice rising in panic. "You have absolutely no right to separate me from my children. Let me through right now." Victoria ignored her, completely focusing, instead on the smallest of the triplets, Maya, who had begun to tremble visibly under the woman's scrutiny. "You," Victoria said, pointing a manicured finger directly in Maya's face. "You're the one who did this to my shoe, aren't you?" The little girl shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes, but remained silent. "Don't lie to me," Victoria hissed, leaning down until her face was inches from Maya's. "I saw you shuffling around, dragging your feet. You deliberately stepped on my shoe, didn't you?" Around the store, other customers, predominantly white, wealthy individuals, watched the unfolding scene with uncomfortable expressions. Some averted their eyes, suddenly finding nearby merchandise fascinating. Others watched with the detached interest of those observing something distasteful but entertaining, like a reality television show playing out in real time. Not a single person stepped forward to intervene. Victoria reached out and gripped Maya's shoulder, her fingers digging into the yellow cardigan. "When someone asks you a question, you answer them. Didn't anyone teach you manners?" The little girl's tears spilled over, tracking silently down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though it was clear she didn't understand what she was apologizing for. Victoria's smile turned triumphant. "So you admit it. You ruined my expensive shoes." She pointed down at the small mud smudge on her white heel. "Do you know how much these cost? More than all three of you are worth, I'd imagine." Patricia's struggles grew more desperate. "Stop this right now. She's 4 years old." She attempted to push past Harold, who placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am, if you can't calm down, I'll have to escort you from the premises." Victoria ignored the commotion, focusing entirely on Maya, who had begun to hiccup with suppressed sobs. With theatrical deliberation, Victoria extended her foot forward, the white heel, with its small mud stain pointed directly at the child. "Kneel down," she commanded. Maya stood frozen, confused by the instruction. "I said kneel down." Victoria repeated her voice, dropping to a dangerous whisper. Now, the little girl slowly sank to her knees on the hard marble floor, her yellow dress pooling around her like a small Sunday dot. Victoria loomed over her, pointing at the smudge on her shoe. "Clean it," she demanded. Maya looked up in confusion, her wet eyelashes clumped together from tears. "I don't have." She began, her voice barely audible. Victoria cut her off. "Clean it with your tongue. Now." The store fell completely silent. Even the ambient music seemed to pause in shock. Nia and Zora stared in horror at their sister. Patricia screamed a raw sound of maternal rage that finally caused several customers to turn and stare openly. Elijah Blackwood stood motionless, a strange ringing in his ears as time seemed to slow around him. The scene before him suddenly overlapped with a memory from 45 years ago, himself as a small boy in a department store, being accused of touching merchandise with dirty hands and being forced by a white sales clerk to apologize. On his knees while his mother was detained by security. The humiliation, the helplessness, the burning shame that had never fully left him, it all came rushing back with such force that Elijah felt physically ill. He watched as Maya's tears dripped onto the marble floor, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Victoria stood over her, a contemptuous smile playing on her lips, completely untouched by the child's distress. Something deep and primal shifted inside Elijah Blackwood at that moment, a tectonic plate of identity and purpose moving after decades of stillness. His hands began to shake, not with fear, but with a rage so profound it manifested physically. His vision tunneled, focusing solely on the small girl in the yellow dress, kneeling before a woman who saw her as less than human. Maya's face, tear-streaked and terrified, bore an expression of confusion and hurt that Elijah recognized at a soul-deep level. And something else. Something in her features, in the particular way her eyebrows drew together in distress, triggered a flash of recognition, so powerful it nearly knocked him off balance. In that moment, Elijah didn't just see a child being cruelly humiliated. He saw himself, his history, and strangely, impossibly, something of his own reflection in the little girl's face. The realization was like an electric current shooting through his body, propelling him forward as his feet began moving of their own accord. He had spent a lifetime building walls around the wounded child he once was, constructing a fortress of wealth and power to ensure he would never be vulnerable again. But watching Maya, those carefully constructed walls crumbled in an instant, exposing the raw nerve of his own unhealed wounds. His steps quickened across the marble floor, each footfall like a heartbeat pounding in his ears, hands still shaking but resolve hardening with every second. Elijah Blackwood had transformed from passive observer to active participant, crossing an invisible threshold that would change not only the trajectory of that moment, but the entire course of his life. "That's enough." Elijah's voice cut through the boutique's tense atmosphere, with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, low in volume, but carrying an unmistakable authority that made every head turn in his direction. The simple cotton shirt and worn jeans that had rendered him invisible to the staff earlier now seemed transformed, as if his change in demeanor had somehow altered the perception of his physical appearance. Victoria straightened from her intimidating posture over the kneeling child, her expression shifting rapidly from cruel satisfaction to irritation at the interruption. "This doesn't concern you," she snapped, barely glancing at Elijah. "This is between store management and these people." Elijah crossed the remaining distance with measured steps, each movement deliberate and controlled, despite the rage boiling inside him. "I am Elijah Blackwood," he stated, watching with grim satisfaction as recognition flickered across Victoria's face. "CEO of Blackwood Technologies, and more relevantly to you at this moment, owner of this building and the entity that holds your store's lease." The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Victoria's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing without sound, like a fish suddenly pulled from water. "Mr. Blackwood." She finally managed her voice climbing an octave higher. There seems to be a misunderstanding. Elijah raised a hand, silencing her with the gesture. The only misunderstanding here is your belief that what I just witnessed would be acceptable to anyone with basic human decency. He removed his smartphone from his pocket, tapped the screen several times, then turned it toward Victoria. I've been recording this interaction for the past several minutes. Would you like to see yourself ordering a 4-year-old child to lick your shoe clean? I wonder how the board of directors for Luminance's parent company would feel about this footage. Without waiting for her response, Elijah knelt beside Maya, who remained frozen on the floor, tears still streaming down her face. "Hello," he said gently. His voice completely transformed from the steel-edged tone he'd used with Victoria. "My name is Elijah. No one should ever treat you that way. Would you like to stand up and go back to your family?" Maya looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes before nodding slightly. Elijah offered his hand, but didn't touch her, allowing the child to make the choice to accept his help. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her tiny hand in his, and something electric and inexplicable passed between them, a connection that felt simultaneously foreign and deeply familiar. As he helped Maya to her feet, Elijah noticed a small, crescent-shaped birthmark on her inner wrist, partially visible beneath the sleeve of her cardigan. His breath caught in his throat as he instinctively glanced at his own wrist, where an identical mark had been present since birth. Before he could process this discovery, Harold, the security guard, had already retreated, allowing Patricia to rush forward and gather all 3 girls in her arms. "Thank you," she said to Elijah, her voice shaking with emotion. "I couldn't get to them. They wouldn't let me." Victoria attempted to regain control of the situation, her professional mask sliding back into place. "Mr. Blackwood, if I had known who you were, of course, this situation would have been handled differently. Perhaps I could offer these customers a significant discount on their purchases today. On behalf of Luminance, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding." Elijah turned to face her fully, his expression hardening. "A misunderstanding? Is that what you call forcing a child to her knees and ordering her to lick your shoe?" He gestured around at the store. "This establishment operates in my building because 15 years ago I believed in the vision the founders presented to me, a space that would celebrate art and beauty and fashion, accessible to anyone with an appreciation for end-of-the-product craftsmanship. What I just witnessed violates every principle this store was founded upon." He stepped closer to Victoria, who instinctively backed away. "As the building owner and leaseholder, I am exercising my right to terminate the employment of any individual who creates a hostile environment on these premises. You are fired effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings, after which you will leave the property and not return." Victoria's composure cracked entirely, her face contorting with rage. "You can't do that. I'm the store manager. You have no authority over staffing decisions. I'll sue for wrongful termination." Elijah's expression remained impassive. "I invite you to try. My legal team will be delighted to present today's video evidence to a jury, along with testimony from everyone present. I'm sure the press will find it fascinating as well." As Victoria was led away by her former security staff, now responding to Elijah's authority rather than hers, Elijah turned his attention back to Patricia and the triplets. The girls clung to their foster mother, their identical faces marked with lingering fear and confusion. "I'd like to make sure you and the children are all right," Elijah said to Patricia, struggling to maintain his professional demeanor while still reeling from the birthmark he'd noticed on Maya's wrist. "Would you consider coming to my office? I can arrange for refreshments, and the girls might enjoy seeing the view from Blackwood Tower. It would give everyone a chance to calm down after this ordeal." Patricia studied him for a moment, her protective instincts clearly at war with her recognition of his intervention. "That's very kind, but we don't need charity." Elijah shook his head. "This isn't charity, Miss Thompson. Patricia Thompson. Miss Thompson. This is basic human decency, nothing more. And if you'll permit a moment of selfishness, I could use the company. It's not every day I fire someone on the spot and potentially face a lawsuit." This drew a small, reluctant smile from Patricia. When you put it that way, I suppose we could visit briefly. Girls, would you like to see a real office in a skyscraper? The triplets, still subdued from their ordeal, nodded with the first glimmers of excitement returning to their expressions. As Elijah led them toward the exit, he found himself unable to stop glancing at the three identical faces, searching for confirmation of what his instincts were screaming. The birthmark could be coincidence, but combined with the inexplicable connection he'd felt and the strange familiarity of their features. Elijah forced himself to focus on the present moment. There would be time for questions later. For now, these children needed safety, reassurance, and a reminder that not everyone in positions of power would use it to hurt them. What did you think about Elijah's response to Victoria's cruel behavior? Comment number 1, if you believe he was right to use his power to immediately fire her, or comment number 2, if you think he should have handled it differently. Don't forget to like this video if you would have stood up for those children just like Elijah did. Subscribe to see what happens next in this emotional story. What connection could Elijah possibly have to these triplets? And what will Victoria do now that she's lost her position of power? The story is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens when they arrive at Blackwood Tower. The executive elevator at Blackwood Tower ascended 80 floors in less than 30 seconds. Its silent efficiency, a testament to Elijah's insistence on excellence in every aspect of his business operations. Patricia and the triplets stood wide-eyed as Manhattan shrunk beneath them, the glass walls of the elevator offering a panoramic view that had cost millions to engineer. Elijah watched the children's expressions with unexpected warmth spreading through his chest. Zora pressed her nose against the glass, pointing excitedly at landmarks below. Nia stood slightly back, more cautious but equally fascinated. Maya, the smallest of the three, remained closest to Patricia, still recovering from the trauma at the boutique, but her eyes darted curiously toward Elijah every few moments. The elevator doors opened directly into Elijah's executive suite, where Jordan Chen, his assistant of nearly 10 years, looked up in surprise at the unexpected group. Jordan, a sharp-featured man in his mid-30s, with an impeccable sense of style and an even more impeccable talent for anticipating Elijah's needs, recovered quickly from his shock. "Mr. Blackwood, I wasn't aware you had guests today," he said, rising from his desk with the smooth efficiency that had made him invaluable to Elijah's operation. "Jordan, this is Miss Patricia Thompson, and—" Elijah paused, realizing he didn't know the children's names. Patricia filled in gently. "This is Zora, Nia, and Maya." Each girl gave a small nod or wave as their name was mentioned. "We've had an incident at Luminance," Elijah continued. "Miss Thompson and the girls could use some refreshments, perhaps something comfortable for the children to wear. The youngest one's dress got dirty when she was forced to kneel on the floor by Victoria Harrington." Jordan's eyebrows rose slightly, the equivalent of a shocked gasp from anyone else. "Of course. I'll arrange everything immediately." He knelt to the triplets' level. "Would chocolate milk and cookies be acceptable while we find you some comfortable clothes?" This earned him the first genuine smiles the girls had shown since the boutique incident. While Jordan escorted Patricia and the children to Elijah's private conference room, a space typically reserved for billion-dollar negotiations that now would serve as a safe haven for 3 traumatized 4-year-olds. Elijah retreated to his office, closing the door behind him. His hands trembled slightly as he sank into his chair, the full weight of the morning's events finally hitting him. The birthmark on Maya's wrist, identical to his own, couldn't possibly be coincidence. Neither could the strange sense of connection he'd felt the moment he saw the triplets. Elijah pulled up his sleeve, examining the crescent-shaped mark that had been with him since birth. His mother had called it his moon blessing, a sign that he was destined for greatness, even when they lived in a cramped apartment in Harlem. His father working 3 jobs and his mother cleaning houses for wealthy white families. He stared at it now, wondering how a genetic marker so distinctive could appear on a child who couldn't possibly be related to him. Unless— Elijah's thoughts flew to Amara Jefferson, the brilliant artist he'd fallen deeply in love with 5 years ago. Their relationship had been intense, all-consuming, and ultimately heartbreaking when she disappeared without warning or explanation. For months, he'd searched for her, hiring private investigators who found nothing beyond a one-way ticket to Paris and a cryptically empty apartment. Eventually, he'd been forced to accept that she had chosen to leave, that whatever they had shared hadn't been enough for her to stay. Now, looking at the three little girls in his conference room, all around 4 years old, with features that triggered an uncanny sense of recognition, Elijah felt the foundations of that acceptance beginning to crack. A soft knock interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Jordan entered with a tablet in hand. "They're settled with snacks and fresh clothes," he reported. "The girls are watching cartoons on the conference room display. Miss Thompson would like to speak with you when you're ready." Elijah nodded, gathering his composure. "Thank you, Jordan. Give me 5 minutes, then send her in." When Patricia entered his office shortly thereafter, she had transformed from the frightened but fierce protector at the boutique to a composed woman with alert, intelligent eyes that missed nothing about her surroundings. She took the seat Elijah offered across from his desk. "Mr. Blackwood, I want to thank you properly for what you did today," she began. "Those girls have experienced enough trauma in their short lives without adding public humiliation to the list." Elijah leaned forward slightly. "May I ask about their background? How long have they been in your care?" Patricia's expression softened. "Just over 7 months. They were abandoned at birth with no information about their biological parents. They've been in the system ever since, bounced between 3 foster homes before me. I'm hoping to provide stability while the state searches for a permanent placement, but—" She trailed off, sighing. "The system isn't designed to keep siblings together, especially 3 at once. And there are additional complications with placing Black children in permanent homes." Elijah nodded, all too familiar with the systemic biases in adoption and foster care. "They seem remarkable, so well behaved, despite everything." Patricia smiled with genuine pride. "They're extraordinary children. Brilliant, really. Maya taught herself to read at 3. Zora has perfect pitch. Naya remembers everything she sees, a photographic memory. They deserve so much more than what the system can offer them." Elijah struggled to maintain his professional demeanor as each new piece of information resonated with his own childhood talents. He had taught himself to read before kindergarten. His mother had saved for months to buy a second-hand piano after his elementary school teacher noted his perfect pitch, and his eidetic memory had been the foundation of his early academic success. "Miss T. Powson, 2. Thompson," he said carefully. "I'd like to help if you'll allow me. I have connections with family court judges, social workers, agencies that specialize in keeping siblings together. Perhaps I could assist in finding them a permanent home where they would remain together." Patricia studied him, her expression guarded. "That's a generous offer from someone who just met us today. May I ask why you're so interested in helping?" Elijah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about his suspicions. Before he could formulate a response, the office door burst open as Jordan rushed in, his usual composure completely shattered. "Sir Victoria Harrington is in the lobby, demanding to see you. Security is restraining her, but she's threatening to call the police if you don't speak with her." Elijah's expression hardened. "Tell security to remove her from the premises. I have nothing to say to her." Jordan shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, she's saying something about knowing your secret, and that it would ruin you if it got out. She specifically mentioned children." The last word was delivered with a meaningful glance toward Patricia, who straightened in her chair. Elijah's blood ran cold. What could Victoria possibly know, and how could she have gathered any information in the short time since their confrontation? "Have security escort her out," he instructed Jordan firmly. "Record everything she says. If she continues making threats, have legal begin paperwork for a restraining order." After Jordan departed, an uncomfortable silence fell between Elijah and Patricia. "Mr. Huthau." "Blackwood," she finally said, "if there's something I should know about your interest in the girls—" "There isn't," he interrupted, then softened his tone. "At least nothing nefarious. I promise you that. I simply—" He paused, reaching for his phone and pulling up a photo he hadn't looked at in months. After a moment's hesitation, he turned the screen toward Patricia. "Did you ever meet this woman during your time with social services? Her name is Amara Jefferson." Patricia leaned forward, studying the image of a striking black woman with high cheekbones, luminous eyes, and an enigmatic smile that had captured Elijah's heart years ago. After several seconds, she shook her head. "I've never seen her before." She looked up at Elijah with new understanding dawning in her eyes. "But the girls do favor her, don't they?" Elijah nodded slowly, his throat tight. "And they're the right age. And Maya has a birthmark identical to mine." He rolled up his sleeve to show the crescent shape on his wrist. "I know how crazy this sounds, but is it possible that you're their father Patricia finished for him?" She sat back, considering. "In all the time I've had them, no one has ever come forward claiming to be family. Their paperwork lists both parents as unknown." She studied him with new intensity. "If what you're suggesting is true, Mr. Blackwood, it would change everything about their situation. But you'd need DNA testing to prove paternity before family court would consider your claim." Elijah nodded, his mind racing ahead to logistics, legal requirements, the complete upheaval of the carefully ordered life he'd built. "I'll arrange for testing immediately if you're comfortable with that. And regardless of the results, my offer to help them find a good permanent home stands." Patricia's expression softened. "You already believe they're yours, don't you? I can see it in your eyes." Elijah couldn't deny it. From the moment he'd seen Maya's birthmark, something deep and instinctual had awakened in him, a certainty that defied logical explanation. "If they are mine," he said quietly, "then Amara never told me she was pregnant. She never gave me the chance to be their father." The pain of this possibility was written clearly on his face. "I lost 5 years with them. 5 years I can never get back." Patricia reached across the desk, briefly touching his hand in a gesture of compassion that transcended their short acquaintance. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, the DNA test. Then we'll figure out where to go from there." Elijah nodded, grateful for her practicality when his own emotions threatened to overwhelm him. As they prepared to return to the conference room where the triplets were happily watching cartoons, blissfully unaware of the life-altering conversations happening around them, Elijah found himself staring once more at Amara's photo on his phone. The questions multiplied with each passing second. Why had she left without a word? Why keep his daughters a secret from him? And if Victoria somehow knew about this connection, what else might she know about Amara's disappearance? The mysteries were mounting, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. The chance encounter at Luminance was no accident of fate. Something much larger was unfolding, a story that had begun years ago and was only now revealing its complex design. 1 week passed in a blur of activity, during which Elijah maintained his distance from the triplets, understanding that raising hopes prematurely could cause additional trauma. The DNA test results arrived via secure courier to Elijah's penthouse on a rainy Tuesday morning. The innocuous envelope containing information that would permanently alter the trajectory of multiple lives. Elijah's hands shook slightly as he broke the seal, unfolding the clinical document with its scientific terminology and statistical analyses. The conclusion was unambiguous, a 99.9998% probability of paternity. He was without question the biological father of Zora, Nia, and Maya Thompson. The confirmation sent him sinking into his leather armchair. The document clutched in trembling fingers as emotions coursed through him in overwhelming waves. Joy, grief, rage, confusion, and a profound sense of responsibility, unlike anything he'd experienced in his 53 years. After allowing himself 20 minutes to process the initial shock, Elijah called the one person he trusted implicitly with sensitive matters. Xavier Reynolds answered on the second ring, his deep voice carrying the quiet confidence that had made him the most sought-after private investigator on the East Coast. "Xavier, I need everything you can find on Amara Jefferson, especially the last 5 years," Elijah said without preamble. "This is priority 1, maximum discretion. Whatever resources you need, they're yours." Xavier, accustomed to Elijah's directness, responded with equal efficiency. "I'll begin immediately." "Any specific areas of focus?" Elijah closed his eyes, the pain of old wounds freshly reopened, making his voice rough. "She disappeared 5 years ago. No warning, no explanation. I need to know where she went, what happened to her, and most importantly, why she never told me about our children. The word "our" caught in his throat, still foreign and incredible. Xavier's typing was audible in the background. Children plural triplets, 3 girls. They're 4 years old and currently in foster care. I just confirmed paternity. There was a rare moment of silence from Xavier before he responded. Congratulations seem inappropriate given the circumstances, but I understand the urgency now. I'll have preliminary information for you within 24 hours. While Xavier began his investigation, Elijah immersed himself in memories of his relationship with Amara, searching for clues he might have missed. They had met at a gallery showing her work, vibrant, complex paintings that juxtaposed urban landscapes with elements of African diaspora symbolism. Amara herself had been similarly complex, fiercely intelligent, passionately creative, intensely private, about certain aspects of her life. Their connection had been immediate and profound, developing quickly from mutual artistic appreciation to intellectual companionship to a consuming love that Elijah had believed was reciprocated. They had discussed marriage but never children. In fact, Amara had explicitly stated she didn't want motherhood, claiming it would detract from her artistic calling. Had that been a lie, or had something changed after she left? As promised, Xavier delivered his initial findings the following day in Elijah's private office at Blackwood Tower. Amara Jefferson left New York on April 15, 5 years ago, on a one-way flight to Paris. Xavier began consulting his tablet. She stayed there for approximately 3 weeks before traveling to a small town in southern France. I've confirmed she was pregnant at this time. Xavier paused, his expression grave. Elijah, I need to prepare you for what comes next. It isn't good news. Elijah braced himself, knuckles whitening as he gripped the arms of his chair. Just tell me. Amara died during childbirth on November 12, 5 years ago. There were complications. Placental abruption leading to hemorrhage. The rural hospital wasn't equipped for such an emergency with triplets. They saved the babies, but couldn't save her. The words hit Elijah with physical force, driving the air from his lungs. Amara was dead. Had been dead for 5 years while he'd nursed anger and confusion, believing she'd simply chosen to leave him. The birth certificate lists the father as unknown. Xavier continued gently. Hospital records indicate Amara was alone when admitted, but 2 people arrived shortly after the birth and before her death, William and Eleanor Jefferson, her parents. Elijah's head snapped up at this information. The Jeffersons were there. They knew about the triplets from the beginning. Xavier nodded, scrolling through his notes. According to my sources, they arranged for the infants to be placed with French authorities, who eventually transferred them to the American system through international adoption protocols. They specifically requested the children be placed in New York State's foster system, but declined to take custody themselves. Rage began to displace grief in Elijah's chest. The Jeffersons had never approved of their daughter's relationship with him, considering Elijah, despite his wealth and success, insufficiently cultured and refined for their daughter. William Jefferson, a prominent art dealer with old money connections, had made his disdain clear during their few uncomfortable encounters. They knew Elijah set his voice dangerously quiet. They knew those girls were my daughters, and they deliberately kept them from me. They let them become wards of the state rather than contact me. Xavier didn't confirm or deny this interpretation, maintaining his professional neutrality. There's more, he said instead. Victoria Harrington has hired an investigator as well, Garrett Reed. He's been asking questions about you and Amara, specifically focusing on hospital records from France. It appears he's traced the same path I have, though less efficiently. Elijah absorbed this with growing concern. How would Victoria even know to look into this connection? The confrontation at the store happened by chance. Xavier shook his head. I don't believe it was chance. Based on my preliminary investigation, Victoria Harrington has been employed by the Jeffersons for various matters over the years. She previously worked as Eleanor Jefferson's personal assistant before moving into luxury retail. The connection is too specific to be coincidental. The implications crystallized in Elijah's mind. You're saying Victoria recognized me at the store, perhaps even knew about my connection to the triplets already. It's a working theory, Xavier confirmed. I need more time to establish the exact timeline and relationships. The knowledge that his reunion with his daughters might have been orchestrated, or at least recognized as significant by Victoria, added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. Over the following days, Elijah began the process of seeking custody of his daughters, working with top family court attorneys, while continuing to support Patricia's foster care of the triplets. He visited them regularly, building a careful relationship without yet revealing his paternity. The girls responded to him with varying degrees of openness. Zora with enthusiastic curiosity, Nia with thoughtful observation, and Maya with a shy warmth that grew with each visit. Patricia proved an invaluable ally, preparing the children for eventual transitions while maintaining stability in their daily lives. "They ask about you when you're not here," she told Elijah, after a particularly successful visit involving ice cream and a trip to the Children's Museum, especially Maya. "She says you have kind eyes." The simple observation from his youngest daughter had left Elijah fighting back tears in Patricia's modest living room. Meanwhile, Xavier continued to uncover troubling information. Victoria had made contact with the Jeffersons immediately after the luminance incident, traveling to their Connecticut estate the very same evening. Garrett Reed, her hired investigator, had obtained copies of the triplets' birth records and was systematically building a file connecting Elijah to Amara and the children. "He's not being subtle about it," Xavier reported. "He's interviewed hospital staff in France, tracking down nurses who were present at the birth. He's building a case, but I don't understand to what end." The answer came 3 weeks into the investigation, when Elijah received an anonymous text message on his private number. "They deserve better than you. Back off while you still can." The threat was clear, even without a signature. Someone, likely the Jeffersons working through Victoria, was preparing to contest his parental rights. Elijah's legal team advised filing for custody immediately before any opposing parties could establish their own claims. The paperwork was prepared with meticulous care, emphasizing Elijah's biological connection, financial stability, and genuine desire to provide his daughters with a loving home. Patricia provided a supporting statement, documenting the positive relationship developing between Elijah and the triplets. Everything was in place for a straightforward custody assignment, until William and Eleanor Jefferson filed their own petition for custody of their grandchildren, claiming they had only recently discovered their existence. The battle lines were drawn with 3 innocent children caught in the middle of a conflict that had begun years before they were born. Elijah stood at his office window, staring out at the Manhattan skyline as twilight descended over the city. In just 1 month, his world had transformed completely. From solitary billionaire to fighting father from a man with a past, he thought he understood, to one confronting painful new truths about the woman he had loved and the family that had kept his children from him. The path forward was unclear, complicated by legal challenges and emotional landmines. But one thing remained absolutely certain. Elijah Blackwood had found his daughters, and nothing on earth would make him lose them again. The Jefferson estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, sprawled across 20 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds, the Georgian-style mansion at its center, a monument to old money and cultivated taste. Inside the wood-paneled library, William Jefferson stood before a marble fireplace swirling amber liquid in a crystal tumbler, while his wife Eleanor perched elegantly on a leather Chesterfield, her posture as rigid as her expression. Across from them sat their attorney Harrison Wells and Victoria Harrington, whose triumphant smile suggested she believed herself an equal in this gathering of wealth and influence. "The petition has been filed," Harrison informed them, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "As the maternal grandparents with significant resources and a stable home environment, you have a compelling case for custody." William Jefferson nodded, his silver hair catching the firelight. At 68, he maintained the imposing presence that had intimidated artists, dealers, and competitors throughout his career in the fine art world. And Blackwood's claim, he asked, pronouncing the name with obvious distaste. Harrison's expression tightened slightly. "Biologically, he has a strong position. The DNA results are unequivocal." However, we're emphasizing his complete absence during the children's formative years, his demanding career, and the lack of appropriate feminine influence in his household. Eleanor Jefferson, 65, and preserved through disciplined maintenance of her once legendary beauty, spoke for the first time. Those children belong with family, real family, not some nouveau rich technologist who seduced our daughter. The barely concealed racial undertones in her statement hung in the air, unacknowledged but unmistakable. Victoria leaned forward eagerly. "I've been compiling information about Blackwood that could be useful. His workaholic tendencies, the revolving door of women in his past." William cut her off with a dismissive wave. "We're not interested in tabloid tactics, Miss Harrington. Your role in this matter is concluded. You've been compensated for your assistance." Victoria's smile faltered. "But I thought—" "You thought incorrectly," Eleanor interjected coldly. "This is a family matter now. Your continued involvement would only complicate things." As Victoria was effectively dismissed from the meeting across town in family court, Judge Sofia Rodriguez reviewed the competing custody petitions for the triplets. With 28 years on the bench specializing in family law, little surprised her anymore, but the case of the Thompson triplets presented unusual complexities. The court is assigning Tanya Williams as guardian ad litem and evaluator. For this case, she informed the assembled attorneys. Miss Indham. Williams will conduct thorough assessments of both potential placements and make recommendations based on the children's best interests. Tanya Williams, a veteran social worker with a reputation for no-nonsense evaluations, began her assessment process the following week. Her first visit to Elijah's penthouse found him uncharacteristically nervous, having spent weeks preparing a space for 3 4-year-old girls. He had converted one wing of his minimalist dwelling into a colorful, age-appropriate haven, with individual bedrooms reflecting each girl's emerging personality space, themes for Zora animals, for Nia, and books for Maya. Mr. Blackwood. Tanya began making notes on her tablet. "Walk me through your typical workday." How would childcare fit into your schedule? Elijah had prepared for this question, presenting a detailed plan that included reducing his office hours, hiring a qualified nanny with early childhood education credentials, and establishing regular routines that would allow him maximum time with his daughters. "My company has an excellent on-site childcare facility that I established 3 years ago for employees," he explained. "I've already arranged for the girls to have places there when needed, though I plan to be directly involved in their daily care as much as possible." Tanya nodded noncommittally. "And female role models, children, especially girls, benefit from diverse influences." Elijah highlighted Patricia's willingness to remain involved in the children's lives, as well as his close relationship with his sister and several long-term female friends, who were excited to welcome the triplets into their extended circle. Throughout the 3-hour interview, Elijah answered questions with thoughtful sincerity, emphasizing his commitment to providing stability, emotional support, and cultural connection for his daughters. Tanya's expression revealed nothing of her assessment. The following day, she visited the Jefferson estate, where an equally thorough presentation awaited. William and Eleanor had prepared a children's wing with expensive furnishings and toys, a dedicated nanny already hired and enrollment secured at an exclusive private preschool known for accepting only the most elite families. "The girls would have everything here," Eleanor explained, gesturing to the pristine playroom where not a single toy appeared to have been touched. "The best education, cultural experiences, social connections, advantages that would set them up for success." Tanya made notes her questions, probing past the material advantages to the emotional environment the Jeffersons would provide. "These children have already experienced significant trauma and displacement," she observed. "How would you help them process these experiences?" William's answer emphasized structure and forward focus. "Children are remarkably adaptable. With proper guidance and sufficient distractions, they'll soon forget the unfortunate circumstances of their early years." This response earned a subtle but noticeable notation from Tanya. Meanwhile, the media had caught wind of the unusual custody battle, and despite court-ordered confidentiality, details began leaking into public discourse. The story proved irresistible. a black tech billionaire discovering his secret triplets, the white grandparents who had hidden them from him, and the racial dynamics underlying the custody fight. Opinion pieces proliferated across platforms, some portraying Elijah as a sympathetic father, denied his rights. Others suggesting the traditional family values of the grandparents might provide better stability. Victoria Harrington, smarting from her dismissal by the Jeffersons, found other ways to remain involved. Anonymous tips to gossip columnists painted Elijah as volatile and potentially violent, citing his confrontation at Luminance as evidence of an uncontrolled temper. These stories, while lacking credibility with serious journalists, circulated widely on social media, creating a narrative the Jeffersons' legal team eagerly incorporated into their strategy. 3 months into the legal proceedings, Elijah found himself increasingly frustrated by the systemic bias he encountered. Despite his resources and genuine commitment, Tanya's preliminary assessment appeared to favor the Jeffersons, citing their traditional family structure and established community standing as positive factors. They're using coded language to say a white married couple is better than a single black man, he vented to his attorney Marcus Washington, a childhood friend who had risen alongside Elijah from their Harlem neighborhood to become one of New York's most respected litigators. Of course they are. Marcus agreed, his tone matter-of-fact rather than outraged. The system was designed that way. But we're not playing their game, Elijah. We're playing a longer game. Marcus outlined a strategy focused on the children's emotional well-being rather than competing resource claims. They arranged for Patricia to testify about the triplets' growing attachment to Elijah, their excitement about his visits, and their developmental progress since establishing that connection. The Jeffersons may have money and social standing, Marcus reminded Elijah, but they have a critical weakness. They don't actually know these children. You're building a real relationship with them. That matters to good judges. Elijah clung to this perspective during increasingly difficult visitations with his daughters. The girls, initially thriving under the developing relationship with their biological father, began showing signs of confusion and stress. Zora became uncharacteristically quiet. Nia developed nightmares, and Maya asked repeatedly why they couldn't stay with him forever instead of just for visits. During one particularly heart-wrenching visit, Maya climbed into Elijah's lap with a children's book pointing to a family illustration. "Is that why we can't live with you?" she asked innocently. "Because there's no mommy in your house." The question pierced Elijah to his core, especially when he learned the girls had begun receiving visits from the Jeffersons, who were apparently emphasizing the importance of complete families. A week later, Judge Rodriguez issued a temporary order placing the triplets with the Jeffersons during the remainder of the custody evaluation, with Elijah granted weekend visitation rights. The order cited the stability of the two-parent household and established community connections as primary factors in the decision. When Elijah received the news, he retreated to his office, locking the door behind him. For the first time since discovering his daughters, he allowed himself to fully experience the rage and grief that had been building. Rage at William Jefferson, who had threatened him 5 years earlier, telling him he wasn't good. Enough for Amara. Grief for the years lost with both Amara and their children, and fear that despite his resources and determination, a system designed to favor people like the Jeffersons might still deny him his daughters. The temporary placement began a new phase of struggle. The Jeffersons relocated to their Connecticut estate, making Elijah's weekend visitations logistically challenging. The girls appeared increasingly subdued during these visits, sometimes using phrases that seemed rehearsed rather than natural for 4-year-olds. "Grandpa says we need proper guidance," Zora informed Elijah during one visit, the formal language incongruous from a child who weeks earlier had been teaching him elaborate, hand-clapping games. More concerning were subtle changes in their behavior. Maya no longer reached for his hand automatically. Nia watched him with wary eyes rather than open curiosity, and Zora's questions focused increasingly on material possessions, rather than the shared experiences they had previously enjoyed. "Do you think the court is treating Elijah fairly in this custody battle?" Comment number 1. If you believe the system is biased against him despite his resources and genuine love for his daughters. Comment number 2. if you think the Jeffersons might provide a more stable home for the triplets. Don't forget to like this video if you're rooting for Elijah to reunite with his daughters permanently. Subscribe to see how this intense custody battle unfolds. Will the Jeffersons succeed in turning the children against their biological father? What evidence might Marcus uncover that could change the court's preliminary ruling? And how will Elijah fight a system that seems designed to work against him? The pristine hallways of Blackwood Technologies fell silent as Elijah passed employees, sensing the dark cloud surrounding their normally composed CEO. 3 months had passed since the temporary placement order, and the situation had deteriorated steadily. The Jeffersons had moved the triplets to their second home in Greenwich, Connecticut, a strategic 90-minute drive from Manhattan that transformed weekend visitations into logistical ordeals. Each visit now required 4 hours of driving for just 8 hours, with his daughter's time that increasingly felt scripted and supervised, rather than genuine connection. Elijah entered the executive floor, nodding curtly to Jordan before closing his office door. On his desk sat the latest court filing from the Jeffersons' legal team, a motion to reduce his visitation to 1 weekend per month, citing disruption to the children's developing routines and signs of emotional distress. Following transitions between households, the familiar rage bubbled beneath his carefully maintained exterior. Emotional distress, as if the source weren't obvious. The phone on his desk lit up with Jordan's extension. "Marcus Washington is here to see you," came the quiet notification through the speaker. Elijah straightened his tie, composing his features before responding. "Send him in." Marcus entered carrying his leather portfolio, his expression already telling Elijah this wasn't a social call. The judge granted their motion, Marcus said without preamble, placing a document on the desk. Visitation reduced to the first weekend of each month with additional restrictions. No overnight stays, supervised exchanges, and a stipulation that all visits occur in Connecticut. Elijah stared at the document, the legal language swimming before his eyes. On what grounds? The court-appointed psychologist submitted a report indicating the girls showed regression behaviors after your recent visits. Bedwetting nightmares, clinginess with the Jeffersons upon return. Marcus's voice carried controlled anger beneath its professional tone. "We both know what's happening here." Elijah did know. The Jeffersons were systematically alienating his daughters from him, creating conditions that would make transitions difficult, then blaming those difficulties on his influence rather than their manipulation. It was a strategy as old as contested custody itself, executed with the precision that wealth and privilege afforded. "What about our counterfiling, the evidence that they're coaching the girls?" Marcus shook his head. "Judge Rodriguez is giving their expert witnesses more credibility than ours. The narrative they've constructed is compelling from a traditional family court perspective. Stable married couple with substantial resources versus single father with demanding career." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And there's something else. Your company is suddenly facing regulatory scrutiny from 3 separate agencies. The timing is suspect." This development wasn't entirely surprising. William Jefferson's connections extended into politics and regulatory bodies. Friendships cultivated through decades of strategic philanthropy and social maneuvering. Still, the escalation signaled a willingness to attack Elijah's livelihood, not just his parental rights. "They're trying to make me look desperate," Elijah concluded. "If I fight the regulatory investigations aggressively while pursuing custody, I appear unstable. If I back down on either front, I lose ground I can't recover." Marcus nodded grimly. "That's their play, and it's working. The court calendar has our final hearing set for next month, but at this rate," he didn't need to complete the thought. "At this rate, the Jeffersons would have established months of primary care with increasingly limited interference from Elijah. Precisely the status quo family courts were reluctant to disrupt. "We need something definitive," Elijah said, rising to pace the length of his office. "Something that proves they knew about the girls from the beginning and deliberately kept them from me." Marcus's expression tightened. "Xavier is still working on that angle, but the Jeffersons have been careful. Hospital records from France show they were present at the birth, but there's no documentation of discussions about custody or their decision to place the triplets in foster care rather than contact you. The intercom buzzed again. "Xavier Reynolds is calling on line 2, Jordan announced. "He says it's urgent." Elijah activated the speakerphone. "You're on with Marcus and me." "What do you have?" Xavier's voice carried an unusual edge of excitement. "Victoria Harrington. She's been working directly for the Jeffersons since before the incident at Luminance. She didn't just happen to be there, she was placed as manager 6 months ago, shortly after the triplets entered Patricia's care. The implications crystallized instantly. They were monitoring the girls through Victoria. They knew exactly who they were the entire time. It appears so, Xavier confirmed. And there's more. Victoria was fired by the Jeffersons last week. Apparently she wanted more money to continue their arrangement. She's disgruntled and potentially willing to talk. This development offered the first glimmer of hope in months, but Marcus immediately identified the legal challenges. Her testimony would be complicated. She could be painted as a scorned employee seeking revenge. We'd need corroborating evidence. Keep working that angle, Elijah instructed Xavier. And find out exactly what Victoria knew about Amara. There has to be a connection we're missing. After ending the call, Elijah turned to the window, staring out at the Manhattan skyline as memories of his own childhood surfaced, patterns repeating across generations. He had been 8 when his prized model airplane collection, painstakingly assembled from discarded parts, and trash had been thrown away by the building superintendent who deemed it junk cluttering the hallway. He'd been 12 when the scholarship to a prestigious science program was rescinded after the selection committee discovered he was from Harlem rather than the Upper West Side address his mother had strategically used on the application. He'd been 17 when his first serious girlfriend's parents forbade her from seeing that boy from the projects despite his perfect GPA and early acceptance to MIT. Now, at 53, with all the trappings of success that should have insulated him from such losses, he was watching history repeat itself as his daughters were systematically separated from him by people who believed themselves more, deserving simply by virtue of who they were. "I can't lose them, Marcus," he said quietly, still facing the window. "Not after everything else Amara's parents took from us." Marcus approached, placing a hand briefly on his friend's shoulder. "We're not giving up. The final hearing isn't for 4 weeks. A lot can happen in 4 weeks. What Marcus couldn't have anticipated was how quickly things would deteriorate. The following day, Elijah received a call from Patricia Thompson, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I've been let go from my teaching position," she informed him without preamble. "Budget cuts," they said, "though I'm the only teacher affected, and we're mid-semester." The timing coming just 1 week after her powerful testimony supporting Elijah's custody claim was too convenient to be coincidence. The Jeffersons, Elijah said the words a statement rather than a question. "I can't prove it," Patricia replied, "but the headmaster at Greenwich Academy sits on the same nonprofit board as Eleanor Jefferson. Draw your own conclusions." Elijah immediately offered her a position with the Blackwood Foundation, overseeing educational initiatives for underserved communities, work Patricia was uniquely qualified for, with compensation far exceeding her teaching salary. To his surprise, she declined. "I appreciate the offer, truly," she said, "but accepting financial support from you now would undermine my credibility as a witness. They'd paint me as someone you bought off." Her integrity only increased Elijah's respect for her, though it left her in a precarious financial position. Meanwhile, Tanya Williams submitted her final evaluation to the court, and despite Marcus's efforts, a copy reached Elijah's desk. The document was devastating. A comprehensive recommendation that permanent custody be awarded to William and Eleanor Jefferson with Elijah, granted monthly visitation rights to maintain biological connection while prioritizing stability. The assessment cited the Jeffersons' traditional family structure immersion in appropriate cultural and social environments and demonstrated commitment to the children's well-being as decisive factors. Reading between the lines, Elijah recognized the systemic bias at work, the unspoken preference for white married wealthy grandparents over a single black father regardless of his resources or genuine love for his children. That evening alone in his penthouse, Elijah wandered into the nursery wing he had prepared months earlier. Each room sat perfect, but empty. The colorful bedding crisped the toys arranged invitingly. The bookshelves filled with carefully selected stories, reflecting the girl's heritage and interests. He sank into the reading chair in Maya's room, surrounded by the books his youngest daughter would have loved exploring with him, stories they might never share if the Jeffersons succeeded in their campaign. For the first time since discovering his daughters, Elijah considered the possibility that fighting for custody might cause them more harm than good. If the court battle dragged on for years with the girls caught between warring adults, would they emerge emotionally intact? If he continued pushing against the Jeffersons' narrative, would they escalate their alienation tactics, poisoning the girls against him entirely? The thought of surrendering was physically painful, a weight crushing his chest until breathing became difficult. But what if a graceful retreat now preserved the possibility of relationship later, when the girls were old enough to seek their own answers? Marcus arrived the following morning to find Elijah at his desk, eyes shadowed from a sleepless night, but expression resolute. "I've been considering dropping the custody petition," Elijah stated, the words clearly difficult to voice. "Not the paternity claim, that's non-negotiable. But perhaps a settlement that grants them primary physical custody while establishing my rights to significant visitation decision-making authority and guarantees they won't be adopted by anyone else." Marcus studied his oldest friend with concern. "That's a major concession, Elijah. Once you take that position, it's nearly impossible to reverse course." "I know," Elijah acknowledged, "but I've been thinking about what's truly best for Zora, Nia, and Maya. This constant conflict, the manipulation, the tension, it's harmful to them. Maybe the right thing is to secure my place in their lives without subjecting them to more trauma." Marcus placed his portfolio on the desk with deliberate care. "Before you make that decision, I need 24 more hours. Xavier believes he's close to something significant. If we're going to negotiate from a position of weakness, we should at least be sure we have no other options." Elijah nodded, fatigue evident in every line of his body. 24 hours. "Then I need this resolved one way or another, for their sake." As Marcus departed, Elijah remained at his desk, staring at the framed photograph he'd recently placed there, a candid shot of the triplets from their last good visit before the Jeffersons' influence had begun altering their behavior. In the image, Zora was mid-laugh, head thrown back in abandoned joy. Nia was focused on constructing something with blocks, her little tongue protruding slightly in concentration. And Maya was looking directly at the camera, at Elijah behind it, with an expression of such pure trust it made his heart ache to remember it. Whatever happened in the coming days, whatever painful decisions he might make, that moment of connection was real. No court order, no manipulation, no system rigged against him could erase what his heart now knew with absolute certainty. These were his daughters, and he would love them fiercely whether they lived under his roof or not. The call came at 4:17 in the morning, pulling Elijah from restless sleep. Xavier Reynolds never called at such hours, unless the information was critical. "I found her journal," Xavier said without preamble, his normally measured voice charged with uncharacteristic excitement. Amara's personal journal from the months before she left New York. It was in a storage unit in Brooklyn, paid for 5 years in advance. The payment was about to lapse, and the manager was preparing for auction. Elijah sat upright, instantly alert. "How did you find it?" Victoria Harrington Xavier replied. After the Jeffersons cut her loose, she became more forthcoming. Mentioned Amara had storage units for art supplies that the Jeffersons cleared out after her death. "I tracked down 3 facilities in her name and found this one still active but approaching payment default." Elijah was already moving, pulling on clothes while keeping the phone to his ear. "What's in the journal? Have you read it?" Xavier hesitated. "I've skimmed enough to know it's significant." She documented everything, Elijah. The pregnancy, her parents' reaction, her plans to return to you. She never intended to keep the children from you. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Then why Elijah demanded emotion, making his voice rough. "Why leave without a word? Why not tell me she was carrying my children, her parents? Xavier said grimly. According to the early entries, they threatened to cut her off completely if she stayed with you. She left initially to think things through, discovered the pregnancy while in Paris, and then, he paused. She was coming back, Elijah. She had a ticket booked to New York for the week after the triplets were born. She explicitly wrote that she wanted to surprise you to place your daughters in your arms and watch your face when you realized you were a father. The beauty and tragedy of that unrealized moment struck Elijah with devastating force. He sank onto the edge of his bed phone, clutched in a white-knuckled grip. She never got the chance, he whispered. The complications during delivery. Yes, Xavier confirmed. But there's more. The journal contains multiple entries about her wishes for the children if anything happened to her. She explicitly stated she wanted you to raise them. She wrote letters to you, and to each of the girls explaining everything. They should have been with her personal effects. The implication was clear. The Jeffersons intercepted them. Elijah concluded cold certainty replacing grief with focused rage. They deliberately ignored their own daughter's dying wishes. It appears so, Xavier agreed. And the journal provides something else critical, evidence that the Jeffersons knew about the triplets from the moment of birth. They made the decision to place them in foster care rather than contact you. They've known exactly who and where the girls were for the past 4 years. This revelation transformed the legal landscape of the custody battle. No longer were the Jeffersons concerned grandparents recently discovering orphaned grandchildren. They were actively complicit in separating the children from their biological father against their own daughter's explicit wishes. I need the journal and any other evidence secured immediately, Elijah instructed. Call Marcus and arrange for proper chain of custody documentation. We need everything admissible for emergency filing. Within hours, Marcus had reviewed the journal and prepared an emergency motion to revise the temporary custody arrangement, citing newly discovered evidence of deliberate interference with parental rights. Judge Rodriguez, while initially reluctant to disrupt the current placement, agreed to an emergency hearing scheduled for the following afternoon. As Elijah prepared for this critical opportunity, Xavier delivered another significant development. Victoria Harrington wasn't just working for the Jeffersons recently, he reported. She's been in their employ for years. She was Eleanor's personal assistant before Amara's relationship with you began. She's been their agent throughout this entire situation. The revelation clarified the strange coincidence of Victoria's presence at Luminance the day the triplets visited. She recognized me, Elijah realized. She knew exactly who I was and who the girls were to me. Yes, Xavier confirmed. According to financial records I've obtained, the Jeffersons have been paying her regularly since Amara's death, most likely to monitor the girls' placement in the foster system. When Patricia Thompson became their foster mother, Victoria arranged to work at Luminance, knowing it was near Patricia's home and school. The confrontation that day may have been spontaneous, but her presence wasn't coincidental. The depths of the conspiracy stunned Elijah. For 4 years, the Jeffersons had known exactly where their grandchildren were, had monitored them through paid informants, yet had chosen to leave them in foster care rather than either take custody themselves or inform Elijah of their existence. The cruelty of this choice, to deprive 3 children of a loving home with their biological father simply to spite him, revealed a vindictiveness that went beyond mere dislike or disapproval. As Marcus prepared their legal strategy for the emergency hearing, a desperate call came from Patricia Thompson. "It's Maya," she said, her voice tight with worry. "She's in the hospital. The Jeffersons called to inform me since I'm still listed as an emergency contact." Elijah felt his blood run cold. "What happened? Is she all right?" "She has a rare autoimmune flare-up that requires specific treatment," Patricia explained. "The doctors want a complete family medical history to determine the best approach, but the Jeffersons are refusing certain treatment options, claiming they're too experimental." Elijah gripped the phone tightly. "Which hospital?" Within the hour, Elijah and Marcus arrived at Greenwich Memorial Hospital, armed with DNA test results and an emergency medical authorization filing. The hospital's pediatric floor was silent, except for the steady beeping of monitors as they approached Maya's room, where William Jefferson stood like a sentry outside the door. "You have no right to be here," he stated coldly upon seeing Elijah. This is a family matter. Elijah met his gaze without flinching. I am her family. Her biological father, as DNA tests have confirmed. And I have critical medical information the doctors need. William's expression hardened. We've provided all necessary information to her medical team. Your presence is disruptive and unwelcome. Before the confrontation could escalate, a doctor emerged from Maya's room, clipboard in hand. Mr. Jefferson, we need to make a decision about the treatment protocol. The standard approach isn't ideal given her specific markers. Elijah stepped forward. Doctor, I'm Elijah Blackwood, Maya's biological father. I have the same condition she's presenting with, Takayasu's arteritis. It's genetic, and I've been successfully managed with a specific immunosuppressive protocol for 20 years. The doctor's expression shifted from confusion to professional interest. Mr. Blackwood, that information could be extremely relevant to Maya's treatment plan. Would you be willing to share your medical records? My attorney has them here, Elijah replied, nodding to Marcus, who produced a sealed medical file. Along with an emergency court order granting me medical decision-making authority in this specific situation, William Jefferson's face contorted with rage. This is preposterous. You can't possibly have obtained a legitimate court order in such a short time. Marcus stepped forward, his professional demeanor unflappable. Judge Rodriguez signed it 30 minutes ago, given the urgent medical necessity and the established genetic connection between Mr. Blackwood and the patient. You're welcome to contest it, Mr. Jefferson, but that would delay Maya's treatment, which I assume none of us wants. The impasse was broken by a small voice from inside the hospital room. Daddy, Maya called out weakly. Is that you? The word, spoken for the first time, struck Elijah like a physical force. He moved toward the door, only to find William blocking his path. She's not calling for you, the older man insisted, though the uncertainty in his voice revealed the lie. She means me. I'm the only father figure she knows. The doctor intervened with the practical authority of a medical professional facing an urgent situation. Gentlemen, I have a sick child requiring immediate treatment. Mr. Blackwood, if you have relevant medical history, I need that information now. Family disputes can be addressed after my patient is stabilized. With that professional assessment, even William Jefferson was forced to step aside, allowing Elijah to enter the room where his youngest daughter lay pale and frightened in a hospital bed too large for her tiny frame. Eleanor Jefferson sat beside her, her perfect posture and immaculate appearance incongruous in the sterile hospital setting. Maya's eyes lit up upon seeing Elijah, confirming that her call had indeed been for him. "You came," she whispered, extending a small hand toward him. Elijah approached the bed gently, taking her offered hand, while nodding respectfully to Eleanor, who watched with thinly veiled hostility. "Of course I came," he said softly to Maya. "I'll always come when you need me." The doctor followed Elijah into the room, explaining that Maya's condition required specialized treatment similar to the protocol Elijah had been following for years. While this consultation continued, Maya drifted to sleep the medications, making her drowsy but her small hand still clutching Elijah's fingers. Hours passed as treatment decisions were made and implemented, with Elijah refusing to leave Maya's side despite the Jeffersons' obvious displeasure. Near midnight, an unexpected commotion in the hallway drew everyone's attention. Zora and Nia, in pajamas and slippers, had somehow made their way to their sister's room, escorted by a flustered night nurse. They insisted on seeing their sister. The nurse explained apologetically to Eleanor. They were quite determined. Zora, always the boldest, rushed to Maya's bedside, while Nia hung back, observing the room's dynamics with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "We sneaked out," Zora announced proudly to Elijah. "Grandpa and Grandma didn't want us to come, but we knew Maya would be scared without us." The innocent revelation that the Jeffersons had intentionally separated the triplets during a medical crisis added another troubling dimension to their caretaking approach. As Eleanor attempted to usher the girls back to their rooms, Nia suddenly spoke up. "We don't want to go back," she stated with surprising firmness for a 4-year-old. "We want to stay with Maya, and with him." She pointed directly at Elijah. Eleanor's expression tightened. "Nia, darling, Mr. Blackwood is just visiting. Maya needs rest and you two need to return to bed. No, Zora insisted, her young face set in stubborn lines. He's our daddy, Maya told us. She saw the moon on his arm, just like hers. Elijah glanced down at his wrist, where his sleeve had ridden up to reveal the crescent-shaped birthmark identical to Maya's. Eleanor Jefferson paled visibly. The girls are overtired and confused, she insisted, reaching for Zora's hand. It's well past their bedtime. But Zora pulled away, moving closer to Elijah. Grandpa and Grandma don't let us talk about you. She continued, her child's voice, carrying the unfiltered truth adults so often avoid. They get mad if we ask questions. They say you didn't want us when we were babies. The raw hurt in her voice as she looked up at Elijah, seeking confirmation or denial of this cruel lie, broke something open inside him. That's not true, Zora, he said gently but firmly, kneeling to her eye level. I didn't know about you, or I would have moved heaven and earth to find you. From the moment I discovered you were my daughters, I've been fighting to be part of your lives. Eleanor moved to intervene, but William appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. That's enough, he declared. Nurses, please escort these children back to their room immediately. Before the situation could escalate further, Patricia Thompson appeared behind William, her calm presence immediately noticed by the triplets, who called out to her with evident relief and affection. Miss Thompson has no authority here. William began, but Patricia cut him off with uncharacteristic sharpness. Actually, Mr. Jefferson, as their former foster mother and designated emergency contact, I have every right to be concerned about their welfare. And I've just had a very interesting conversation with their night nurse about some concerning behaviors she's observed during their stay. While the adults navigated this tense standoff, Marcus Washington was quietly documenting everything. The girls' spontaneous statements, the Jeffersons' attempts to separate the triplets during a health crisis, their deliberate alienation of the children from their father. Every piece added to the compelling narrative they would present at the upcoming custody hearing, a narrative that increasingly revealed the Jeffersons not as concerned grandparents, but as vindictive manipulators, willing to use 3 innocent children as pawns in a game of social status and revenge. Late that night, after the other triplets had been permitted to stay in Maya's room under Patricia's supervision and the Jeffersons had reluctantly departed for their home, Elijah stood at the window of the hospital room watching, the 3 small forms huddled together on Maya's bed. Despite hospital protocol, the staff had allowed the sisters to stay together, recognizing the therapeutic value of their connection. Patricia approached quietly, standing beside him at the window. They talk about you all the time, you know, she said softly. When the Jeffersons aren't around, they call you the kind man with the moon mark. Elijah smiled faintly at this description. They're extraordinary children. Yes, Patricia agreed. Amara's journal entries about her hopes for them, her wishes for you to raise them, they deserve to be honored. These girls deserve to know the father their mother wanted them to have. Elijah turned to her, his expression determined yet peaceful, the calm certainty of a man who has found his purpose after years of searching. I won't lose them again, he promised, not just to Patricia, but to the sleeping children, to Amara's memory, and to himself. No matter what happens at that hearing, they will know they have a father who loves them completely. The family courtroom hushed as Judge Sofia Rodriguez entered, her experienced gaze sweeping over the assembled parties. On one side sat the Jeffersons with their legal team, William and Eleanor, projecting confidence in their custom-tailored suits and decades of social privilege. Across the aisle, Elijah Blackwood sat beside Marcus Washington, his expression composed but alert like a chess grandmaster preparing for a crucial match. The back row held Patricia Thompson, Xavier Reynolds, and various expert witnesses for both sides. Conspicuously absent were the triplets themselves, Judge Rodriguez having decided that 4-year-olds should be spared the tension of courtroom proceedings about their future. This court has reviewed substantial documentation from both parties. Judge Rodriguez began, her tone neutral but authoritative. Today's hearing will address new evidence presented in Mr. Bryden, Blackwood's emergency motion, as well as finalizing permanent custody arrangements for Zora Nia and Maya Thompson. Mr. Washington, you may proceed with your opening statement. Marcus rose, buttoning his suit jacket as he approached the podium. Your Honor, this case initially appeared to be a straightforward dispute between biological father and maternal grandparents, both seeking custody of 3 children tragically orphaned at birth. However, evidence we will present today fundamentally changes that narrative. He paused, allowing his words to settle in the courtroom. We will prove that William and Eleanor Jefferson have known about these children since their birth 5 years ago. We will prove they deliberately concealed the children's existence from their biological father, contrary to their daughter Amara's explicit wishes. We will prove they monitored the children throughout their time in foster care, without taking action to secure their welfare. And finally, we will prove they have engaged in systematic efforts to alienate the children from their father since his discovery of their existence. The Jeffersons' attorney, Harrison Wells, shifted uncomfortably as Marcus continued methodically outlining the evidence they would present. When Marcus returned to his seat, Harrison approached the podium with considerably less confidence than he'd displayed in previous hearings. Your Honor, while Mr. Washington makes serious allegations, the fundamental question remains unchanged: what environment best serves these children's interests? The Jeffersons offer stability, resources, and a traditional family structure that has been proven beneficial for child development. Judge Rodriguez's expression remained impassive. The court will consider all factors relevant to the children's well-being. Mr. Washington, you may call your first witness. Marcus called Xavier Reynolds, who testified about discovering Amara's journal and the storage unit's payment history. The journal itself was entered into evidence with key passages highlighting Amara's intentions regarding her children's future. She explicitly wrote, and I quote, "If anything should happen to me, Elijah must raise our daughters. He will give them the love, strength, and sense of identity they'll need in this world. My parents would try to erase half of who they are." Xavier read from the journal, his professional demeanor never wavering despite the emotional weight of the words. Harrison objected repeatedly to the journal's admissibility, arguing it couldn't be authenticated as genuinely Amara's writing. Judge Rodriguez overruled these objections after Marcus presented expert handwriting analysis confirming its authenticity. The courtroom atmosphere shifted palpably when Victoria Harrington took the stand. Initially belligerent and defensive, her testimony gradually revealed the extent of the Jeffersons' manipulation. "Yes, I was instructed to report any sightings of Mr. Blackwood at Luminance," she admitted, under Marcus's careful questioning. The Jeffersons knew he occasionally shopped there and wanted to be informed if he ever encountered the children. "And were you also instructed to create situations that might reflect poorly on the foster family?" Marcus asked. Victoria hesitated, glancing toward the Jeffersons. "I was told to document any behavioral issues with the children, anything that might suggest their foster placement was inadequate." "Even if you had to manufacture such situations," Marcus pressed. After a long pause, Victoria nodded. Mrs. Jefferson suggested certain tests might reveal problems. The shoe incident, that was one such test. This admission sent murmurs through the courtroom. Marcus methodically built a timeline establishing the Jeffersons' knowledge of and interference with the triplets throughout their lives, culminating in their recent efforts to turn the girls against their father. When Harrison cross-examined Victoria, attempting to discredit her as a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge, her testimony remained consistent, supported by financial records showing regular payments from Jefferson family accounts throughout the relevant period. The most dramatic moment came when William Jefferson himself took the stand. Initially composed and articulate, presenting himself as a concerned grandfather, acting in his grandchildren's best interests, his facade cracked under Marcus's persistent questioning about Amara's final wishes. "Mr. Antave, Jefferson, your daughter's journal contains multiple entries expressing her intention for Mr. Blackwood to raise her children if anything happened to her. Did you read these entries before placing the triplets in foster care?" William shifted uncomfortably. "Amara was emotional and confused during her pregnancy. Her judgment was compromised." "That wasn't my question," Marcus noted calmly. "Did you read your daughter's wishes regarding her children's future?" "Yes," William finally admitted. "But we disagreed with her assessment." "So, You deliberately contravened your dying daughter's explicit instructions regarding her children. The blunt question hung in the courtroom. William's composure finally shattered. Elijah Blackwood was never good enough for my daughter, he exclaimed, his voice rising with long-suppressed emotion. A tech upstart from Harlem with no breeding, no culture, no understanding of our world. Amara was infatuated, but infatuation passes. We were protecting our grandchildren from a man who would never truly understand their heritage. The racial implications in his statement were unmistakable, causing Judge Rodriguez's expression to tighten noticeably. Their heritage, she repeated carefully. Mr. Jefferson, could you clarify what aspects of the children's heritage you believe? Mr. Blackwood wouldn't understand. William seemed to realize his misstep too late. I meant their artistic legacy, of course. The Jefferson family has been involved in fine arts for generations, but the damage was done. His mask had slipped, revealing the prejudice underlying the Jeffersons' actions. The hearing continued with testimony from Patricia Thompson about the children's development and their relationship with Elijah, and from Tanya Williams, who surprised the court by revising her earlier recommendation. After observing the children during Maya's recent hospitalization, I've reconsidered my assessment, she stated. The triplets display a natural and strong bond with Mr. Blackwood, despite limited time together. More concerning, I observed the Jeffersons actively discouraging this attachment and separating the siblings during a time of crisis behavior that raises serious questions about their capacity to prioritize the children's emotional needs over their own agenda. By late afternoon, Judge Rodriguez called a brief recess before delivering her ruling. The tension in the courtroom was palpable when proceedings resumed, with both sides visibly exhausted from the emotional intensity of the day's testimony. This court's primary concern is the well-being of 3 young children who have already experienced significant disruption and loss, Judge Rodriguez began. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, including newly discovered documentation of their mother's wishes, I find the following. She detailed her findings, methodically emphasizing the Jeffersons' deliberate concealment of the children from their father, their failure to seek custody themselves for 4 years, despite knowing the children were in foster care, and their recent efforts to alienate the children from Elijah once he discovered their existence. Therefore, this court grants full legal and physical custody of Zora Nia and Maya Thompson to their biological father, Elijah Blackwood, effective immediately. Mr. and Mrs. Jefferson are granted limited visitation rights to be supervised initially and potentially expanded based on their demonstrated ability to support the children's relationship with their father. The ruling continued with specific provisions regarding the transition process therapy requirements and other details designed to minimize further trauma to the children. When Judge Rodriguez finally adjourned the proceedings, Elijah sat motionless for several moments, the weight of victory settling over him like a mantle of both joy and responsibility. Marcus clasped his shoulder, the gesture conveying more than words could express between longtime friends who had faced systemic barriers together since childhood. 6 months later, Elijah stood in the kitchen of his transformed penthouse supervising as 3 pairs of small hands helped prepare Sunday breakfast. The formal minimalism that had once characterized his home had given way to vibrant artwork, scattered toys, and the organized chaos that inevitably accompanies raising 3 energetic children. Zora carefully measured flour for pancakes, her tongue protruding slightly in concentration. Nia arranged fruit into elaborate patterns on serving plates, her artistic talent already evident. Maya stood on a step stool beside Elijah, solemnly cracking eggs with surprising dexterity for a 5-year-old. "Like this, Daddy?" she asked, separating the shell with precise movements he had demonstrated weeks earlier. "Perfect," he affirmed, still feeling a wave of wonder each time one of his daughters called him Daddy, a title earned through patient love, rather than merely biological connection. The transition hadn't been seamless. The first weeks had brought nightmares, testing of boundaries and moments of grief as the girls processed yet another major life change. But Elijah had approached fatherhood with the same determination and attention to detail that had built his business empire, supplemented by a profound love that made every challenge worthwhile. Patricia Thompson had become an integral part of their extended family, accepting a position as executive director of the newly established Blackwood Foundation, which focused on reforming foster care systems and supporting children of color within those systems. Her experience and insight proved invaluable, both professionally and personally, as she helped guide Elijah through the complexities of parenting 3 children simultaneously navigating the aftermath of trauma. The Jeffersons, following a period of reflection, had begun tentatively rebuilding a relationship with their granddaughters under supervised conditions. Eleanor, more than William, seemed genuinely interested in establishing a healthy connection, though progress remained slow and measured. Victoria Harrington faced legal consequences for her role in the custody manipulation, ultimately accepting a plea deal that included community service and prohibited her from working in childcare or educational settings. The Luminance boutique space had been transformed into the Amara Jefferson Community Arts Center, providing free arts education to underprivileged children throughout Manhattan. The center's walls featured reproductions of Amara's vibrant paintings, ensuring her artistic legacy lived on in spaces accessible to everyone, regardless of social status or background. On this particular Sunday morning, as sunlight streamed through windows that once framed a solitary existence, but now witnessed a family's joyful chaos, Elijah found himself teaching his daughters his mother's pancake recipe, a DAWWWW. Humble tradition from his childhood in Harlem now being passed to a new generation. My mom used to say that the secret ingredient was love, he told the girls, as they stirred the batter together. She said you had to think about all the people who would eat the pancakes and how happy they'd be. Zora considered this with characteristic directness. That's not really a measurable ingredient, Daddy. Elijah laughed, the sound echoing through rooms that had once known only silence. You're absolutely right. But some of the most important things can't be measured, can they? Later that afternoon, the family visited the small, elegant memorial garden Elijah had created in Amara's honor on the penthouse terrace. The girls placed artwork they had created beside the flowering plants that represented their mother's spirit, always growing, always vibrant. "Do you think she can see us?" Maya asked, softly arranging her drawing with careful precision. Elijah knelt beside his youngest daughter, gently adjusting the yellow ribbon in her hair, the same color as the dress she'd worn on the day he first saw her. "I think she brought us together," he answered truthfully. "And I think she would be so proud of the amazing people you 3 are becoming." As the girls continued their memorial ritual, Elijah watched with a heart full beyond measure, knowing that from the deepest tragedy had emerged his greatest blessing. A cruel command in a luxury boutique had led to the discovery of a family he never knew he had, and in finding his daughters, Elijah Blackwood had finally found himself. What would you have done in Elijah's position? Would you have fought this hard to gain custody of children you never knew existed? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story moved, you please like and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and family bonds. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes, even against impossible odds, justice prevails and families find their way back to each other. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. This powerful story illuminates how racial discrimination persists even among society's elite, weaponized to separate families and deny basic human dignity. Elijah's journey reveals that true power comes not from wealth or status, but from unwavering determination to fight injustice, especially when protecting those you love. The Jeffersons represent how prejudice can disguise itself behind claims of tradition and stability while actually serving to perpetuate discrimination across generations. Maya's forced humiliation in the boutique mirrors countless real-world incidents where Black children are dehumanized in public spaces. Patricia demonstrates how allyship requires sacrifice, choosing integrity over personal gain. Most importantly, this story shows how systems designed to protect children can still harbor deep-seated biases that must be actively confronted. Elijah's victory wasn't just personal, it challenged institutional assumptions about what makes a proper family. The transformation of Luminance into the Amara Jefferson Community Arts Center symbolizes how spaces of exclusion can become places of healing and community. Despite wealth and privilege, nothing could shield Elijah from experiencing racism, yet nothing could stop him from reclaiming his family and rewriting their future. What moments in your life have you witnessed discrimination that made you want to step in like Elijah did? Have you ever had to fight against a system that seemed designed to work against you? If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button to help others find this powerful message about standing up against racial injustice. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that shine a light on the struggles many families face and the strength it takes to overcome them. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how discrimination still affects families today, or with anyone fighting their own battle against prejudice. Comment below with your own experience of fighting for what's right against seemingly impossible odds. Thank you for joining us in this emotional journey through Elijah's fight for his daughters. May it inspire you to stand against injustice whenever and wherever you encounter it.